holy crap, for 200 bucks, I can get the reports that I would get from some top 4 consulting company that would cost me, 20 grand. Is this going to put people out of work?
Hi, I'm Matt Marshall, founder and editor-in-chief of VentureBeat, and I'm here with Sam Witteveen, who's a developer in agentic AI.
How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great, but I'm reeling because I'm trying to figure out what the ramifications are of the OpenAI's deep research. Fascinating product that was released probably around a week ago now. It's bringing together this agentic RAG that's been around for a while, right? This ability to go and retrieve information using search and retrieval techniques, and then bringing that together with reasoning, right? This idea of this extended chain of thought that OpenAI has been working on with its O1 and O3 models, and it feels really significant, Sam. We've obviously seen commentary in the community, but it also feels like it's the first product that could potentially, mass market product that could put a lot of people out of work because of what it does.
Look, I definitely think it's something really interesting because OpenAI have done it, right? The name itself, like we saw Google actually, have a product called Deep Research, a month before this. And open source, there've been things like this out there for quite a while. I do think the fact that it's OpenAI doing it, this is their third agent. They did the sort of task thing that has never worked for me once. They did the operator thing, which seems to be a bit hit and miss. But their deep research thing is this kind of like agentic search, agentic RAG that, and like you said, it's using the reasoning model where it takes its time, right? So it probably is doing a lot of different calls, a lot of different searches to put all this together. And I think this is something where for most people, it's the first time they've ever seen something like that. And that's why it's a big deal.
Yeah. Okay. So let's cover briefly what it is and does it work, right? So basically, this is the deep research allows you to put in a prompt asking it to go do some research on a topic. And what it does is it comes back first and wants you to verify maybe 6, 7, 8 things based on your query, just to make sure it's got what you want. And then it goes out and does this. It's almost like it's looping, right? It's planning a research plan, and then it goes to search, and then it's kind of reading what's out there, and it's almost this. It analyzes, and then it loops through this plan, right? This repeated set of steps, and it produces this really good report with citations that as we've seen similar products before, as you see, right? Perplexity, Google Deep Research. But what people are saying is that it has a lower hallucination rate, right? Because of the model being used, O3, that has a low kind of a floor on hallucination rate of 8%. It's still hallucinating, but it's relatively low, right? So
Yeah, look, I think there are a number of interesting steps in there that you talked about. Okay, so the first one is the fact that it comes back to you at the start for clarification. So Google kind of had this in their one, but it seems like OpenAI's one really does try to clarify exactly what you want. And this is where a lot of the agents just failed, in the sort of early days of agents, is that you would ask for one thing. Generally, people, when they ask for one thing, are pretty vague anyway, right? The agent then goes off on its sort of own tangent, and you end up getting something kind of not what you were after. At best, maybe sort of slightly, okay, this is kind of on track kind of thing. So the clarification step is kind of huge, right? I think that's like a fundamental thing that people haven't seen these models really kind of being sort of proactively pushing back on you. Like, okay, you said this. Do you want, X, Y, or Z here? Or tell me more about what you want to know about this for. What's the use case? That kind of thing. And I think that allows them, to do a much better thing. The whole sort of loop idea, a lot of these ideas we've talked about before, right? We talked about the Magentic One, agent from Microsoft. Again, it's got sort of like a web surfer thing. It's got, something that takes notes. It's got a planner. So of course, we don't know exactly how OpenAI are doing it. My guess is it's probably quite sophisticated in the way that it's structuring these tools, but sort of fundamentally, the tools are probably very similar to what we've seen before. But because they've got the model, because they know how that model works, and they've got a sort of lot of inside knowledge, they're then able to maybe customize all these tools for that model. And I think that's one of the key things.
Right. So the key thing is the way OpenAI has implemented this. It's a little black box. We don't know exactly, what's in there, but they have the benefit of sitting there and looking at what these other open source offerings are doing, right? So, Magentic One, it's out there for everyone to look at. And then they can use their, industry leading efforts to then take that and then build it kind of behind this wall, right? This black box, but it is doing the work slightly better than everyone else. At least that's the observations that I've certainly seen in terms of using it. Sounds like you are as well. So Sam, you're as deep on agentic as anyone. Can we go through the two or three things, right? Self reflection, tool use, kind of judging that basically they're doing potentially here.
So there are a number of patterns that have been developed for this kind of thing, and these are not new. These are like things that are a year old, 18 months, 2 years, even longer for some of these patterns. And these are things are like you talked about the whole idea of reflection, of getting a model to sort of reflect back on itself. Now that combined with the sort of clarification step is going to allow it to create probably a lot better plan, maybe not planning in the sort of formal academic sense, but in a sort of just like sketching out, here's what we're going to do, here's the steps we're going to do it. I And then be able to act on those things. The other cool thing that I think, OpenAI has put a lot of work into is the whole idea of tool use. So we saw them take their time to add search to ChatGPT, right? That was something that for a long time people were sort of complaining, "Hey, Perplexity this, Google that kind of thing." But where's your search, right? And they tried it once, I think, with sort of a partnership with just Bing. That didn't go down so great, so they sort of took that away and then sort of rethought how they were going to do it. And I got to say that's something that they've really nailed. That they've got a very fast search engine that seems to be able to get data probably coming from Microsoft or from a few other sources. I And then they're very good at being able to sort of pluck out citations from that to answer a particular query. And I think people has been seeing that with like O3 Mini on ChatGPT is really awesome at that. So if you combine sort of that with these agentic loops, you are going to get good quality output. Okay, so there are a number of agentic patterns in something like deep breed search. So I'm just quickly going to go through three of these here that are the kind of techniques that are being used in deep research. So the first one is the reflection pattern. And this is basically where the model will actually reflect on its own output after it's made a generation and then sort of like decide if that was a good output, if that could be improved. And if it can be improved, it will give itself notes, which will then go in with the original version and the notes to generate a new version out. And if it's like happy with the output, it will basically be like, okay, this is fine. This can go back to the user. You've got a very simple pattern here where the prompt comes in, it will go through this loop of generation and reflection, and then finally will go back as a response. Now, in deep research, that wouldn't necessarily go back automatically to the user. That would go back to part of the report and part of putting it together back here. The second pattern that deep research is clearly using is tool use. And this is the ability for the LLM to basically reach out to other data sources, whether that most likely is going to be search, and then refine some of those, perhaps reaching out to other tools for RAG and things like that in the future. Certainly, as they add deep research to being a enterprise kind of thing, it's going to be reaching out not just to search on the general web, but through particular databases, through particular vector stores, etc., for getting information back that is more up to date than what's in the large language model, and also a lot more specific than what is actually in the large language model. Third technique that I'm pretty sure that they're using in deep research is the whole idea of LLM as a judge. So my guess is that deep research actually writes multiple outputs and then goes and maybe even uses multiple models for doing that. And those then get judged as to which is the best and most relevant to the request of the user. So you could imagine that it pulls back a whole bunch of different information, it writes up different components, and it may even write 2 or 3 different versions of something. And they've got this kind of thing where you've got the judge deciding here which of these 3 is the best, and then putting that into the report and discarding the other ones. So these are just 3 simple techniques that are agentic in nature, being used in lots of different agents out there that are most likely also in deep research. What are you hearing from people about, does it work? Does it not work? I'm kind of hearing sort of like, 75, 80% of the time, really good, 20% of the time, not very good at all.
Yeah, I think we have to acknowledge that it's going to be hallucinating. The advantages that it brings far exceed the fact that it's going to hallucinate a few. I think we do have to check. We have to check human research, right? I mean, if we're going to be relying on an analyst in our company to do research and they bring it back, there's a certain amount of trust that we put into that person, in terms of what, the credibility of the sources that they're citing and so on. I think the model that we're seeing with open, deep research is going to have the same issues, right? But I asked the head of artificial intelligence at BNY Mellon yesterday, how what he thought, and he was saying it is potentially really powerful for doing things like research on credit risks, right? Where, hey, can you go find things that maybe we haven't thought of? And sure, they're going to be doing diligence on all of that, right? They're going to be obviously checking that in terms of the things that it brings back, but in terms of going and finding things you may not have been aware of, for example. But that's what I'm hearing, and it's certainly the case for my own efforts internally, right? Where the results, you're sharing it with the team, and then the whole team is up to speed with something that they wouldn't have been.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that makes this kind of thing work is that when we tend to search something on a search engine, we maybe do 1 or 2 searches, right? And we come at that search from a particular angle. The agentic thing could come at it from like 30 different angles and search for it. And therefore, they will find stuff that just the 1 or 2 angle is not going to find. And I think, then it becomes like a whole rag, right? Once you've got all these sources, you then start, the thing can actually go through and look at like, okay, well, based on what they want the report about, what would be the questions? What would be the sort of topics? And it can rag through all that stuff that it found to be able to get these really good answers out. And you're right. Like, I do think that these things are going to find different takes on it that one particular human is not going to come up with. Now, humans in total, yes, we'd probably have like 300 different ways of, searching for these things. But the sort of just one person making a report is not going to be as good as this kind of thing.
Right. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I think clearly we're conceding that you have to have control over this. You have to have verification. I'm almost, I guess I'm just assuming that that goes with the territory, right? Anything we do has to be verified. Anything a human has to do, they have to vouch for it. So we're gonna make sure that we check the sources when it comes back on something that we're researching that's really important for the business, right? But I think what we're seeing is that, you know, Google's done a pretty good job out there in terms of, ranking the quality of sources, right? It's not perfect, but it's done really well. And it's actually there's emerging research there where you can actually generate findings around the credibility of sources. Things like open access MBFC ratings, right? There's actually research that's going into this where, you have sites that are open source, free access that are judging the credibility of certain sites. And you can do a lot of work there generatively, right? To borrow on that and then and rank the quality of sources. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, but I think that's the direction we're going to be going into.
So I got a question for you. Okay, so one of the things I've been wondering about this week is in this new world where you've got these agents and I've got this agent and it just goes and does 10 reports for me, right? Or let's say it does it for one of my staff. I do all of my staff that end up staying actually then just become managers. So it's like they're managing by checking other people's work, right? So, is this going to be the new sort of human thing that people are going to check certain all these 10 reports and stuff like that, and then you're going to have one person maybe to check that person, just so that you kind of know, okay, at least there's not too much hallucination in here. But I think this really radically changes the sort of marketplace, right, for labor. And for a lot of companies, like you talked about the financial institutions, they have these people that just sit there doing these boring reports that are pretty much standard about what they're looking for, what they're writing, uh, and they're just running them on different companies or different people or different things like that. You've got to think that that's going to basically put people out of jobs.
It's most definitely, Sam. I think you have to recognize that this has always been a challenge with AI, right? There's always going to be a risk about job loss, but at the same time, I think in macro level, you're going to probably see more jobs created, right? I mean, as every revolution has happened. No, in the short term, I think most people would agree, right? Analysts that and economists and other students of this would say, hey, you might have more job losses than jobs created, initially, right, with these big disruptions. But I can't think of an industry, the knowledge working industry, at least, right? Obviously, in physical jobs, this is right. That's going to be protected for some time, right? But
Well, for a year or two, right? Like until
the
until like
robots
Elon's got his robots and we're gonna see the deep seek robot probably roll out like, in a month or two.
Yeah, running DeepSeek and deep research at the same time. Absolutely. But I think, outside of finance, I mean, just walk through the industries, right? So, healthcare, right? We were talking with NYU Langone, right? Big health research group on the East Coast. But they're it's transforming the work of their early interns, and this is even before deep research. But they were actually using this sort of agentic RAG, right, where it's allowing these interns to get the latest research papers based on the notes of their visit with their patient, right, the previous day. Right, and the next day pops up with all the latest stuff they need to know because it's going out searching the web, searching their own internal database for this stuff, right? So, retail, right, in terms of what markets need, what goods on the shelves, all this, I can't think of an industry where this wouldn't be applied, right?
Look, yeah, I do think that you mentioned that sort of like a lot of these things have been, people have been talking about them since before, deep research. And I think, yes, that's totally true. I do think this is different though, in that a lot of people now have seen, holy crap, for 200 bucks, I can get the reports that I would get from some top four consulting company that would cost me, 20 grand. Right. And then that sort of starts being people thinking like, hang on a minute, this is going to cause real changes. And it's been interesting because Sam Altman's been over in Paris this week, at the AI summit or whatever it was called. I and it was interesting that like when he went out and sort of took some questions from reporters, yeah, there were a lot of questions about, hey, Elon wants to buy you kind of stuff, but there were other serious questions saying, hey, like how many, is this going to put people out of work? And you could see that even he was sort of uncomfortable to maybe be truly honest about this. I think they see that, that yes, this is going to basically mean lots of jobs where you had lots of people in companies doing things are just not going to be needed now. And I think like you mentioned the finance sector, I think that's probably one of the first ones we're going to see it. I think that's primed for it because their reports are so much the same kind of report for different, companies, entities, that kind of thing.
Right. Um, I think we should be clear about how companies should are actually able to use this, right? So obviously, it's a standalone product right now, right? There's no news around an API. I'm assuming that they're going to come out with this, right, where you could actually use this in interesting ways, or
I'm not sure that they
really,
will, Matt. Okay, I'm not sure that they will come out with an API. They, Sam Altman's just announced now that they're not going to release O3 basically as a standalone model, right? O3 is the thing that's driving it, right? It is the model
right,
that's driving this. You got to think now that a lot of these companies are going, hang on a minute, we make these super cool models, and the model itself we charge like pennies for sort of hundreds of thousands of tokens. But if we can charge, $200 for, a use for 100 uses of this thing, or, whatever it is that they're charging per month, that's a much more profitable model, you would think. And you got
right.
to think that maybe a lot of these companies are now going to start thinking, okay, do we really want to have an API out there? Maybe we want to just make some of these consumer products or these enterprise products and bill for them. You noticed this a lot when we talked about Microsoft, right? That they started charging per task and not per token anymore, right? That was like what, November last year. They were sort of one of the first ones to do this.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Thanks for the correction. I think what I was referring to, probably better put, was this ability to actually use this agentic RAG on your own documents, right, in the enterprise.
Yeah,
Surely they're going to allow the enterprise to actually
for sure.
access their,
Yes.
right. So not the API model, but it's something where down the road, I think they signaled in their presentation that they're going to allow enterprise companies to access their internal data as well, which make it really powerful. But you're absolutely right, Sam, in that this is a really interesting development. The Sam Altman is essentially saying that they're going to merge these non-thinking models, right? GPT-5, right? With the thinking models, right? So that it's basically going to be with it packaged within a single product, right? Again, kind of more of a black box, as you say, kind of blending and packaging these things into a wider offering. And it'll be really interesting to see where that goes. But
I
you know,
gotta think. Okay, I gotta say this, right? I think that clearly GPT-5 was nowhere near as good as they anticipated it was going to be, right? Altman said that, oh, this will be the same sort of leap that we saw from GPT-3 to GPT-4. We would see that from GPT-4 to GPT-5, and it just doesn't seem to pan out, right? A lot of the big models aren't getting this huge leap that they did from the previous generation. I think one of the ways they're getting around with this is basically to say, okay, we're going to merge this with the reasoning model because they know that that's working, right? And I think that they've got some interesting stuff there. They've clearly worked out a new thing there. I and so this is sort of like they get out of jail card, right? Hey, we're going to
that's right.
merge GPT-5 with that thinking, and it's going to be really good, right?
Well, not only that, so they're merging it with reasoning, but I think what deep research, again, bringing back to deep research,
Yep.
represents is the first time you're really merging it again with another big thing, which is the agentic capabilities, right? Suddenly,
Sure.
now
Yeah.
you're off the hook from having it all reliant on that model, but you're going to be using tool use, right? Search, right? Coding agents, and then you can just name again. In my conversation with BNY, right? They've got like 13 different agents that they're using, and I think a lot of enterprise companies in certain, right, in their lead generation recommendation product, right? But I think a lot of these enterprise companies are going to be using these specific agents, and if OpenAI can get in there with a platform that that brings the model, links it to these other tools, it can continue that perception, the market positioning that it is in the lead, right? If it's doing this better than anyone else.
I was suddenly hoping in that 12 days of shipments thing that one of the things we were going to see was the search engine be available on the API. And to be honest, that's something that I would love to see, right? I can see that like that would improve the quality of the agents that I'm building a lot. Because I kind of feel like OpenAI's got a good search system in there. They've got a good way of doing the citations, all that sort of stuff goes really well. Another thing, just back to the API thing very briefly, is you've got to also wonder though, if I had to put money on it, I'd say that they're still going to release the API for some of these models, because if they don't, China's probably going to do it and going to make them look bad, right? And so I think like that's something that a month ago people wouldn't have really thought about. Post DeepSeek, we're in a different world now. This deep research is kind of like the first taste of something that's kind of like on the path to AGI. And we saw this with the humanity's last, the world's last exam or whatever, that the deep research gets the highest score, not the model.
Okay, Sam, let's pick this up for next time, right? This idea around agents and AGI. I think that's a big theme. I think you've hit on something there, but let's use it for a future episode. Thank you everyone for watching, and don't forget to click like and subscribe.